I'm sure you've all heard of Australia Post, and for the last 200 years, they've been delivering our parcels and mail. But also, you may know that Australia Post does 6 million identity checks every year through their retail outlets. So, here with us today, we have Cameron Gough. Cameron is the GM of Digital ID for Australia Post. He actually founded Digital ID back in the original inception back in 2012. Prior to that, Cam has led up the Digital Delivery Centre for Australia Post as well. And prior to that, he held many different consulting roles in Big Four consulting companies. So here today, he is talking about their journey with Digital ID and where they're at today. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you. As I'm going through listening to that, it's an amazing amount of change, isn't it? It's just incredible. And for many of you, you kind of look, maybe some of you are younger than me, but I grew up in the 70s in New Zealand. And the most exciting thing to happen in my childhood was this additional TV channel came along, and like when I was about 7 years old. And a few years later, colour TV came along. But you look at kids today, and you know what I was used to as a youngster was change didn't really happen. I wasn't used to change. It didn't come along. You didn't expect it. You just kind of imagine the world would just continue to be the same and you just grow up in the same world. And I look at the kids of today, particularly I've got a 14 and 16-year-old, and I get so excited when the next iPhone comes out and it's got some great function in it. And they just kind of look at it and go, oh, that's cool. And they just expect change. And they're growing up in a world of constant change and they're used to it. And it really is such a difference. And it is an exciting time to be alive. And if you look at what's enabled that pace of change, it's almost like a continuous build-up of generations of innovation that are innovating on each other. And this platform concept is playing out in a lot of the things that are taking place. If you look at that 5G clip, you're thinking that's not just mobile technology. That's an 8K camera, there's virtual reality playing out, there's fiber optic cables that are transferring all that data around and so on. And you look at Uber and Airbnb, and you've all seen the stories about how they don't own inventory, etc. All of that's been possible because of a whole layering of inventions and platforms that have come before it. And with Digital ID, which we'll jump into in a moment, what we're trying to do with Digital ID is we believe there's a missing piece of economic infrastructure in Australia, and it's around identity, and particularly online identity. And when you think about how you identify yourself, most of us in the physical world, we've kind of solved it. We go to our wallets and we get out a driver's license. We'll get out a passport if we're carrying that. We'll say, here you go, this is me. And it's very much based on what governments say about you. Governments issue that ID. We trust the government, and we sort of say, yep, that must be you. But as things move online, that doesn't translate. And we, in Australia, we don't have a way to easily prove who we are online. You know, if any of you have opened a bank account recently or done a loan or a mortgage or transferred property, some of that stuff you just can't even do online because it's too hard. But when you do it, you're off getting driver's licenses and passports, and it's kind of painful. It doesn't really work. And I want to start with a thought piece. So if you think about how we really identify people, there's that abstract concept of driver licenses, passports, where you're trusting a government. But I'll bet you, a few of you probably met some people in this room tonight. And I'm guessing none of you asked to see an ID when you got introduced. Is that right? You did? Right. Pretty socially awkward, isn't it? How we really do identity is we use a bunch of things around relationships and trust and temporal aspects, like how long has someone been known to you, or how long do you know this person, how long do they know that person? So there's this fella here who claims to be Scott Player. How sure are we that he's Scott Player? Yeah, is he gone? Is he still, here he is, right. Okay, so if I asked you, how many are pretty confident this is Scott? Oh, you've got a few doubters in here, right. Okay, but if you think about how you build up a picture of Scott, this is how I did it. So I hadn't met Scott until tonight, but I went on to LinkedIn. I'm still waiting for him to accept my LinkedIn request, unless you have. He'll be sorting that out now. It'd be great to be friends, real friends. Connections, sorry. But on LinkedIn, I can see, you can't see this from here, but I've got 8 mutual connections. So I'm thinking, okay, there's 8 people that have had a previous connection with Scott that I know. So I'm getting a bit of confidence from this. And pretty soon he'll accept me. So he's sort of saying, yeah, I do exist, I'm real, I'm monitoring this account. I can see where he's worked, I can see a history there. And then do a search and found this article when he first joined APD. So thinking, oh yeah, okay, well, this is a site that's sort of starting to talk about him. It's connecting him to the job that he claims to have. Stuart Oliver, who I've known for a little while, introduced me tonight when I came in and asked me along tonight. So there's kind of a connection there with someone that I know and trust. And then I looked up on Google. I'm guessing you're not a American football player, right? But they've got helmets on. I couldn't really tell, so refined the search. Started to find a whole lot of faces that looked like you, and found there's a connection somewhere in there to the company that you work with. So getting pretty confident by this stage. And then Bloomberg, well-known, trusted site, long history, website checked out, and it's got a reference. So I'm going to trust that this is indeed Scott Player. So if any of you are in doubt, you can be pretty confident he is. Now, if Scott came up now and gave me a driver's license, and here you go, I'm actually, Malcolm Davis, I would probably question that document. I'd question whether that was a real driver's license, because I'm more confident of this whole history here than I am of that driver's license, right? Yet, when you do online identity today, it's all about the driver license. Now, some of you may be settled in your lives and you haven't changed things often, but if you went to change bank accounts and move cities and apply for properties, you'd be finding driver license, passport would be coming into play. So it's really curious to us that this is the way we really do identity. Yeah, online, they're doing it via this other sort of method that's been common in the physical world between untrusted parties. So moving into online, and I'll do a build-up here of it's a bit of a thought piece around how we do identity online and where your data's stored. So you go back not that long ago, and you'd have, this is kind of maybe 10, 15 years ago, multiple websites. And each of these websites starts to think, this would be a great idea if we give you a username and password. How many of those can you get? So you find yourself logging into each one, starting to share data with each one. And your data has been, it's uncontrolled by you. It's starting to come down and it's sitting in this layer with all these properties. That gets pretty painful. And some of these sites are within the same organizations. You've got Google, Microsoft, you've got federal government ones, sort of some of the Facebooky ones out there. And so some of the formatting's gone here. But what then started to happen was these organizations, including Post, got organized and said, well, you know what, look, all of these websites belong to us. We'll give you a single kind of identity or login for these sites. Okay. And that made things a little bit more convenient, but still all your data's sitting down here and they're sucking data out of you and putting it into these stores, and some of them get hacked and you lose your data and you're starting to get nervous. And then this did look a lot cleaner in the other formatting. And then some of these sites are saying, you know what? You come and you use us every day. What we'll do is we'll let you use your account with us to log into other sites, and that starts to get really convenient. Now, I don't know about you, but I get really nervous about these guys. It's just spooky what they know about me. Russian dash cams on my feed and so on. Now, they now know all this other stuff about me if I start using it to log into all of these sites. And so you see with things like Cambridge Analytica, I think there's starting to be a real shift in sentiment about how these are convenient, but you trade something off for that convenience. Now, it is incredibly convenient, and for a lot of, in the research we do, a lot of particularly youth, they really don't care. They take the convenience. But when it comes into the question of control, the big trend we see is consumers want to take control back. And where they don't want to take it back, the governments are helping them to take it back. And so we talked about GDPR before, which is a big shift of saying, you know what, you've got all this data sitting down here, but guess what? We're gonna remind you that it's actually owned by the consumer. This data belongs to the consumer. If the consumer wants to move data between these parties, they should be able to do it. And if the consumer wants you to forget who they are, they should be able to make you forget who they are and delete your data from their systems. And in Australia, the consumer data rights, if any of you have looked at that, that's a shift to say pretty much the same thing. So the consumer owns the data, If the consumer wants to shift that, they're starting with banking, with open banking, but that will move to utilities. I think telcos are on the list as well, and that will keep rolling on. And so there's this real shift to say, look, the consumer always owned this data, but we've kind of forgotten it in the way that we've set up a lot of the online world. But we're going to shift back to that. This data is owned by the consumer. They should be in control. And I heard one commentator talk about private data is becoming like radioactive waste. Right? No one wants to own it. No one wants to hold it. It's becoming really expensive, and it's best left up to the professionals to do that. And I think that's where it's all heading. So what we're trying to do with Digital ID is to enable this to happen. So what we do is we say, you know what? We will hold on to your data. So if you want to prove who you are online, we will verify who you are. So we will gather your passport, driver's license. We'll check those back to source, and we'll verify you. And then we will be the trusted party to allow you to share just what those organizations need and want to keep. Now, I like the slide you had up there around blockchain. There were kind of two things in there. One of them was around encryption. So not leaving your data with any party. It should be under your control. You control who sees it. So we've built this in a way where we cannot read any of the data that we've got on any individual. We encrypt it, and we have the keys sitting on the smartphone of the individual, and they never leave that phone. So we cannot see the data at all. So in that respect, we're kind of ticking the box on that encryption piece. And whenever your data is shared, it must be controlled by the individual to share that. So I will try and bring this to life now with a video. Digital ID, a lot of what you'll see in the marketing that's coming up will be an app. It's all smartphone-based app. But we know that people, as excited as we are, we know that people aren't going to wake up and download an app from the App Store to verify themselves. It's more likely people will verify themselves in the context of some job they're trying to do. So you're either trying to open a bank account or you're trying to access government services. So you'll see playing out in this video two examples. You'll see the app, but you'll also see this kind of guest flow where we've embedded it into websites. Okay, so I'll just let this play out. And what we're trying to do, if you think of PayPal for payments, when you kind of come out of a merchant site, you go into this PayPal experience that is there for you. It looks after your payment details. We're doing the same thing with identity. We take you out of a site that you may or may not trust, and you're into this environment that's familiar. It's Digital ID. You see the Post logo, and we do the verification. And then at the end, we hand back to that site only what you agree to share, and we offer you the chance to sign up to Digital ID. Now, if you had a Digital ID on your smartphone, this is the experience that you'd get. So you'd log in, and you'd scan that code, which asks you for the detail that the site wants. And you can see there, we're only sharing your name and date of birth. That's it. We're not sharing your passport details, your driver's license. So we're limiting the footprint of your identity. And then here is just a clip of a section of signing up in the app. And what we're looking to do is to move the market beyond just document identity to get into actually verifying that they're your documents. So at the moment, when you're entering a passport or driver's license online, there's no guarantee it's yours. It could be your partner's, it could be one that you've stolen. So we use biometric technology to capture your face. We do what's called a liveness test that you'll see soon, which verifies that you're a real person. And then we'll do a biometric match on that. So when this gets submitted here, we're going off to the government's data sources to check that that's valid. And now we'll go into, just a moment, we'll go into capture the face. Okay, so I'll let this sequence play out. And once we've got a face shot, there are a few mechanisms we can use to confirm that that's you. So one of them is the government is introducing what's called a face verification service. So we can send in this photo with your details and they'll say, yes, that's this person. The other one is if you've got an Android, you can scan the microchip on your passport, just like you do at the airport when you're coming in and out, and we'll compare the photo from the passport. And the last one is until that face verification service from the government comes online, you can come into a post office and we do a quick check. So all you're going to see here is the iOS experience at the moment, and this last step is where you need to come into a post office to confirm it's you. And at the end of that, you get a digital ID. And once you've got that, where we want to go is to start to add other claims about you. So it might be that you've got a working with children check. It might be that you're an employee of a company. It could be you're a registered nurse. And you can do that in person, and you can also do that online. So that was pretty fast going through there. I'm happy to take any questions after we finish this on anything that you saw. So where are we today? So we've been live since about June, May, I think it was last year. We've got 28 customers signed up. We've got about 13 of those that are live, and we'll be heading towards 1.1 million verifications through that kind of online flow that I showed you pretty soon. We've won some awards, and we've got approval for proof of age in about half the states and territories. So that means that one of the big use cases or value propositions that we found was youth wanting to go out with just their phone. They don't want to carry ID out with them. So we're in about 85% of the scanners in Australian venues now, and you can use it with the scanners or without the scanners to get into pubs and clubs. And lastly, what's next? So entitlements is our terminology for this idea that you've got someone's core identity, but then what are other credentials that others can give to them? So it could be your qualifications, or as we saw in the shop before, working with children check, etc. And the beauty of that is a physical card, which is what we usually use, that could be revoked, but unless you hand it back, you're still carrying that round. So because this is electronic, we've got the ability to immediately revoke it. The issuers can see where it's been used, and they can tell organisations that might have previously relied on that something's changed about it. So very significant when you get into things like working with children checks, working with vulnerable people. If there is a reason for someone to have that revoked, you actually want to go out and tell the people that that's been used with that that's no longer valid. Authentication, if you think of social logins, so we saw the Facebook example before, what we want to turn this into is a kind of trusted social login. So it's just there to help you access websites. There's no password in any of this system. So it's all sort of Touch ID, Face ID enabled, etc. with your smartphone. And the last one, back to social verification. So what we can do with digital ID is we can start to get back to that original idea that I showed around how we verify people in the real world. So we could have a system, particularly in Indigenous communities or refugees and so on, where you've got this problem if they don't have the right documents. We can do with this kind of social verification concept where you could say, well, I want an elder, for example, in my community to verify who I am. And we would enable that elder to be a verifier in that community. And you can start to build up a fabric of people that reinforce people, if you like. So you'd say, look, I've checked my passport and driver's license, but I've also got 34 people here that have also had their passports and driver's licenses checked that are vouching that I am Cameron Gough. And we think that's pretty powerful. And then you can add to that the kind of social logins, and this person's been on LinkedIn for 5 years and they've had this much sort of interactions on LinkedIn. Even Facebook can be used. Very hard to create a fake 5-year Facebook profile, an active one. Very, very hard. So that was it. We're very excited about what we're doing. If we're successful, we hope that we'll get to something like what's happening in Norway and Sweden, where about 75% of the population have got something similar to this. And it's just, identity just falls into the background. They don't think much about it. To verify who they are is just a click on the phone and they're done. That's a really exciting future, and we hope it will enable businesses and communities, individuals, organisations to interact with a lot more trust than we can today.